hand over to our distinguished chair and moderator, I have the proud privilege of saying a few words of introduction. Our chairperson, Shri Praveen Pradeshi, is an Indian Administrative Service officer with over 29 years of experience in the services and the former Municipal Commissioner of Mumbai. He has held various senior leadership positions within the United Nations as the Chief of Transition Recovery Unit, UNDP Geneva, and Senior Coordinator of United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Reduction. He has subsequently headed the Regional Office Support and Coordination Unit of UNISDR. He has been a key player in post-disaster and conflict recovery programs of UNDP and the public administration governance reform, wildlife conservation, and the public health effort against COVID-19 in Maharashtra, India. He was the Global Program Coordinator for the Defeat NCD partnership with the United Nations Institute of Training and Research. He has also served as a Secretary in the Ministry of Marathi Language. Currently, he is the member of Capacity Building Commission. And a very warm welcome to you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished moderator, Dr. Ashish Chaturvedi, is the head of the Environment, Energy and Resilience at UNDP India, has been working on the topics of environment, climate change, circular economy in India for almost 2 decades. He has been involved in drafting policies and guidelines at the sub-national and national levels and supported the implementation of major schemes and programs of the Government of India. And with those words of introduction, I hand over to our distinguished moderator, Dr. Chaturvedi, to kindly take over and carry forward the proceedings of this session. Over to you, sir. May I once again remind you, sir, the time duration is approximately 1 hour 15 minutes.
Are these working?
Yes, sir, they are working.
All right. Yes. Thank you very much, and welcome to all of you after the much-deserved tea break. The session is about cooperation, and given the kind of what the messages you heard at the sort of introduction as well as in the keynote, we're actually really struggling with multiple intersecting crises. There is sort of war, there is, in some parts of the world, there is a pandemic, which is hopefully behind us, but it does occasionally turn around and kind of scare a lot of us. And of course, there are other crises of the environment, like pollution, like climate change, loss of biodiversity. So all of these multiple crises are interacting and intersecting with each other. And it's more and more sort of apparent that no single agency, no single country, no single individual is going to be able to make that transformative change. We need to cooperate at multiple levels, within communities, within resident welfare associations, within small sort of villages and panchayats, but we also need to collaborate at the level of states, at the level of sort of countries, but also across international boundaries. So therefore, this session is really opportune to start thinking about what kind of cooperation structures do we need to deal with these tricky times, with these sort of, in the era of the polycrisis that we've been hearing for a while. We have a really interesting panel, tried to set up an interesting panel for you. We have representatives from the government, we have representatives from international organizations, and of course we have representatives from the National Institute of Disaster Management. The way we'll structure it is that we'll have first set of remarks by the chair, then I'll go around to my panelists, and then at the end, sort of we'll have a set of questions, a time allotted for question and answers, so that you can actually interact with the panelists and of course with each other as well, because as we've been saying, there's a huge amount of expertise which is not on the dais all the time. So there will be sort of, we'll call upon your expertise so that we can interact with you and come back to you on several occasions as we go along. And then I'll ask my chair to sort of wrap up the entire session. As I've been told a couple of times already that we have an hour and quarter to sort of wrap up this session, so I really expect my fellow panelists to stick to time, and of course, so that we have substantive time left for engagement with the audience as well. Now, In addition to sort of this era of the poly-crisis that we've been talking about, the other moment which is really opportune and which is kind of timely is the leadership of India at G20 and India as an actor, as an active shaper of global cooperation. So without sort of further ado, I'd like to call upon the chair of the session, Mr. Praveen Pradeshi, who's also a member of the Capacity Building Commission, a great innovation by the government, I must say, to address the entire audience. Over to you, Mr. Pradeshi.
So I'll use...
Please, come. ठीक, yeah.
Yeah. How do you put it up on the... to project it on the...
Can we have Sir's
Yeah,
presentation?
it's that. So thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. As our moderator mentioned, this is an era of poly-crisis, and we are going through that, but it's also a time of great opportunities. So let's also focus on these opportunities that we have to convert most of the crisis into opportunities for a better world. I mean, the biggest opportunity is the UNFCCC breakthrough, which talks about the damage and loss and the fact that we can compensate countries who are facing great environmental disasters because of the changing climate. And this is going to be converted into a global fund which can then address both adaptation and mitigation. So this is the good part of the story. The story which I don't really believe in is that I don't think that a lot of the funds will come through as for the past experience. So most of us have to rely on what we are going to do in any case, because whether the world or the world as a whole listen to us or not, the crisis is going to come onto us. So we need to act ourselves. So what can we do? These are a few issues which I thought we could list. One is, of course, as mentioned by Sushilji, this is a great opportunity because India's G20 presidency shows we can showcase two things which are very important from India's point of view. One is working at scale, that most of our solutions which we have been able to put up are at very large scale, and that is something which a lot of countries in the world can learn from us, and also we can share that. The other way to do it is to look at ways in which we have gone through various modeling exercises on climate change. For example, in my own state, in Maharashtra, we worked on a district-specific climate change prediction for both the number of rainy days in terms of intensity and the number of drought days. And that makes climate change real to people who live in those districts. Because when we talk at a very global level, it's something which is going to happen and doesn't matter to us. But when I say that Nandurbar, a district, is going to have very intense rainy days in a very few days and is going to be flooded, then people of Nandurbar, including the local MLA, begin to ask us, okay, what are we going to do about this? So that's something that we can really share about it. I also want to talk about the lens from which I am looking at this whole issue is from the capacity building lens, because much of the disaster management or disaster resilience or climate resilience, the actions are public goods. They are not private goods. That's a very big difference. If you see most of the areas in which a country like India and a lot of our neighboring countries in Southeast Asia, where they have moved greatly ahead, is where private sector takes the lead. Telecom being a very good example, airlines being another example. But areas which are public goods, which only the public services deliver, in all of those, our countries are really struggling. So whether it is primary education or whether it is sanitation, almost all the SDGs, including disaster resilience, is a public good. And it requires civil servants to deliver. So that's a very big difference. A telecom service is delivered by geo private managers, but disaster resilience and community resilience is delivered by public servants. So that's the reason why Honorable Prime Minister set up the Capacity Building Commission, to which I belong. And what is the aim of the Capacity Building Commission? The aim of the Capacity Building Commission is to work with 3 million civil servants of India. We have 3 million civil servants, which are only government of India. And if you add the states and the local bodies, my friend from Uttar Pradesh knows, it adds up to another 25 million. So these are the people who deliver public goods. And how do we ensure that they have knowledge, skill sets to tackle the forthcoming climate issues? Because those are things with which we can't plan from today's knowledge, from today's DPRs. Example, the DPRs we make for roads are based on what is today's climate and rainfall, but not what is going to be projected in 30 years. So also this is a great opportunity, because most of our roads, bridges, infrastructure is at design stage, unlike in the developed world where they are already built. So it's very difficult to retrofit them, but we can design them afresh with most of the climate resilience issues. So how does the Capacity Building Commission work? We work at the demand side and the supply side. So on the supply side, we have more than 750 public services training institutions, which includes NIDM as one of them on the disaster sector, but from railways to all. And on the supply side, we have more than 93 departments of the government. The Science and Technology Department is one of them, and 60 ministries. Why do we call it demand and supply side? The difference that we have tried to make now is, what are the needs of these departments in terms of the goals? For example, Ministry of Environment and Climate Resilience, they have a vision of the LIFE program, various wetland programs. Do the officials who work in that ministry and their agencies have the knowledge of emerging technologies, of the behavioral skills with which to tackle their own goal? So this is the demand side. So we create capacity building plans. And on the supply side are the training institutions like NIDM, which deliver it. But many of the training institutions deliver teacher-based training only, which is that what the teachers know, that's what they teach. They don't deliver it based on what is the need of that officer for that role or for the public. So we try to convert most of the training institutions into a more learning needs assessment-based capacity building delivery. So this is what I wanted to say. We also have an annual HR summit, which will be like the Davos of the world, but not on the private side, on the public sector side. But I wanted to come with this point that, you know, a lot of us are relying a lot, and in many countries, I was recently in Bangladesh, and also in a lot of countries participated. And if we are always looking forward to the fact that the UNFCCC will lead to a huge amount of fund and we can just rest easy while those funds will help us to do the resilience work, that's not going to happen. So we need to really do it on our own. I want to share 2 examples. I don't know in terms of time, can I share? Yeah. So I wanted to share 2 examples where India can make a difference to the world in a big way. This is the model I was talking about on climate change. For example, this type of modeling, if we can do for our whole region, then countries which are connected, most of our rivers are from Nepal, from Tibet, from Bhutan. So this model shows exactly which districts are going to face drought. The red part is those areas where the intensity of rainfall is going to be very low, and the number of rainless days, even in monsoon, is going to be higher than the average. So these are the areas where we need to focus on in terms of drought mitigation in advance. And this type of a modeling can be done across the region so that we can share river flow and other types of data across the borders and benefit from it. I wanted to give this example of what happened recently in the floods of Maharashtra. These areas were not really into flooding, so this is the most developed part of Maharashtra, and this got flooded in the most developed areas. And if you see the red parts, this is the area where most of the infrastructure is located. In fact, Maharashtra, if it's a powerhouse, agricultural powerhouse, it's in all this red part. This is the Krishna River Valley, where most of the sugar factories and all that is located. Now, what is our traditional approach to this? Our traditional approach is, we should not be building in the river flood zones. We should all move away from the blue zone. This is what we have been taught. But if you move away from this area, entire Kolhapur, Sangli district will become a desolate place. So what are the solutions for this? No longer traditional solutions hold for these mega events. So we are working with both, UNDP was part of that, the World Bank and ADB is part of this, and this project is looking at what is the surplus water which is shared between two states, that is between Karnataka and Maharashtra, and because of intense rainy days, that surplus is over excess of 178 TMCs. That is the total amount of water allocated to Maharashtra and Karnataka. On the flooded days, this much is in excess. It doesn't belong to anybody. It just goes in the sea. Can this water be diverted to deficit basis? This is the project which is being worked upon. And unless we are able to work on such mega issues, climate change is going to really attack us in a way that small solutions don't work. I want to come with Mumbai, and that's my final example. I was Municipal Commissioner Mumbai, and we need to follow what we call the whole city approach. So if you look at Mumbai floods, which happened in 26 July, they happened because the number of rainy days get concentrated just in a few days, and most of the city gets flooded. Now the interesting thing is, Mumbai is a very well-planned city. So the stormwater drainages cater to the rainfall of 100 years prediction. They're so good, at least in the part of Mumbai which was built over the last 100 years. But they are no longer enough. The same stormwater drains are no longer enough for two reasons. One, that the average rainfall now is not spread out over 60 or 80 days as it used to be, but it happens in 10 or 15 days. So the runoff is much more than the stormwater drains can carry. So that's number one. And secondly, which is even more important, that this percolation index, that the amount of water which goes in the ground versus that which flows off, that is changing because we have built up most of the city. So when the British designed them, they calculated 45 to 50% will percolate in the ground and 50% will run off of the average rainfall. And the stormwater drains cater to that. But today, 100% of the water runs off because we have built up whole of the city like Delhi. So is the solution to expand the stormwater drains? There is no space to do that anymore. So can we learn from the best examples in the world? Yes, there is a very good example where we can learn. I won't get into this. It's from Japan. So in Japan, what they have done is, in Tokyo, they have the same problem. And the entire Edo River and its basin, there is an underground system which takes all the water, which is the surplus water, underground. They took 15 years to build that, but today they are ready for a climate change type of. If a typhoon comes, most of the river flows underwater. So we are trying to learn that sort of a issue from them, and this is the example that I think the sound is not there. So they have built this all underground. So I'll end this with just saying that though we have a lot to learn from Japan, we can share a lot with Japan. When the tsunami came to Japan, nobody died of the tsunami, but a lot of people died while evacuating them because they couldn't evacuate at scale. Look at our example from Odisha. That's what I was saying. Nobody died, though the scale at which was equal to the population of many of these countries. So I'll rest here. There are a lot of opportunities for sharing, and we can do a lot in terms of good practices and also sharing knowledge across countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pardesi. And many thanks for sort of showing the examples, which is not only about South-South cooperation or North-South cooperation, but also possibilities of South-North cooperation and learning. And I think this is very important when you actually start thinking about structures for cooperation, structures for engagement. I think the structures which work best are those which allow for eye-to-eye cooperation, eye-to-eye engagement. And maybe these are things that we should actually discuss in the Q&A session as well. I'd now like to turn over to someone who's sort of already spoken in the inaugural session, but we wanted him to kind of lay emphasis on what international cooperation and internal cooperation structures can deliver. So over to you, Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, Secretary of the SCR.
Thank you, Ashish. Since I have already spoken in the inaugural session, so he has given me a hint that I should speak less. So I will restrict my intervention on the issue of international cooperation. I think Mr. Pardesi has already given enough hint that, India has been a sufferer of climate extremes and climate change. Although India has been contributing substantially to climate action, and on our own, we have been spending huge amount, both on the mitigation and adaptation. You know, the COP22 decisions, at Paris was that India should be receiving something like $100 billion per year beginning from 2018. But nothing of that sort happened, and we hardly receive any fund. There is a recent report of Escape Asia Pacific Disaster Report. You read 2022 report, and there itself it says that India needs a minimum of $46.3 billion for adaptation alone, and mitigation, in fact, we need double of that. So $100 billion that we needed is not an overestimation but underestimation of the thing. Now, climate is a very interesting, I would say, very interesting scientific event. No other event is as interconnected as climate change. So, see, since I am a weather forecaster, I can recall decades back, there was a famous scientist called Lawrence. He gave an idea of butterfly effect. So the butterfly effect is like, if there is any weather disturbance takes place in any part of the world, that propagates to other part of the world. And that is how the weather forecasting can be, that you get a clue from that to predict weather. Same thing, climate is so interconnected. Anything, anybody, any part of the world does, it will impact the other part of the sea. India is very uniquely positioned. As I said, we do so much in climate action, but we are the worst, one of the worst impacted country in the world. And I think in the morning I said that, the reason is that our population density is high, our poverty level is still high, and we are not the country which has reached the development level of Western world, and therefore the impact is, and especially some of these states like northeastern states and eastern states are really going to be impacted. Now what do? And we don't get money, so it is like a unique situation where you don't have any international support, you don't have any kind of what is called the sympathy of international community for us, and therefore that becomes a big challenge for us to manage. Anyway, I'm not going to detail, but coming to a very important point that I think Mr. Qadeshi also hinted on that. See, climate change is a global phenomenon, because the impact is local. And therefore, no national program can address the impact at the local level. So what we need is going down to the local level, and therefore, the Government of Science and Technology, I am very happy Dr. Nisha is here. She is heading the climate change program of DST, the two national mission. And there says that under these two missions, 29 state climate change cells have been opened in this state. Now their primary, in fact, function is to undertake research and adaptation action. We did a very outstanding work, and thanks to all the states who participated in the work, developed vulnerability, the district level and sub-district level vulnerability maps. There start the action. And some of the states, I think Jammu Kashmir, and I see Madhya Pradesh, Mr. Thakkar is there, and many other, they already started action on that. They provided that these parameters have been shared with the state government, local government, at the district level, district collector level, and they started taking action. I think there we need to really work. So basically, and giving this perspective, we do not expect international cooperation, international support for climate action. We need to have all in India-centric actions. And therefore, the central government and the state government and the local government must work together to address this thing. We, in fact, have, we developed National Science and Technology Innovation Policy recently, and part of the policy, we brought the research, scientific research at the center stage of the action. And climate is one area where we can do. Since I am a secretary SERB, we in fact did some very many action in this area. I am not going to detail all this thing, but one point I want to must mention here, that we are now working on technology indigenization, and this is relevant for climate change. So you must have heard this technology indigenization concept. The idea is that we, instead of bringing the experts from international level, and by the way, this is very important, and I want to share that I personally had interaction with Indian community outside India. And we realized that they are in fact ready to cooperate with India and support. So we are working on a concept of, instead of say from grain drain to grain gain, we are working on another concept called grain circulation, where the NRIs or the people of Indian origin can remain there in their place of working, but they help India in technology indigenization. I think I will stop here. Just last point, and I will add that SCRB has in fact initiated several actions. One action, and this is my personal feeling, was that one of the areas that we have been kind of worried about is that developing research capability and research manpower in the country. Somehow India has to number of researchers in the country something like 5.5 lakh, but that number per million of population is less. So now we are working on this area, and as a Secretary SERB, I took action, and we now going to have, instead of 300 postdoctoral fellows every year, that has been the trend, we are going to make it to 1,000. So this is the big step that we are taking. We are going to announce shortly. So I thought I should sing. There are many schemes of SERB for bringing international cooperation. I am not going to detail. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Dr. Gupta, and I'm sure we'll come back to you during the Q&A session where you can provide more details and the ambitious programs that you've announced. And of course, thanks very much for highlighting the indigenous capacities, indigenous research and technological innovations which SERB and of course the Government of India is aiming to develop as a part of its endeavor to become more self-reliant, Atmanirbhar, as it's often mentioned. So many thanks for your inputs. I'd like to now invite a colleague who's sitting in Bonn, Murli Tumarakudi, who is the director of the G20 Global Initiative Coordination Office. He's been working closely with Ministry of Environment and also with us on the G20 initiatives. So Murli, welcome, and many thanks for driving quickly enough to reach your office so that you can speak to us. So I hope the tech colleagues can actually make sure that he's heard. Over to you, Murli, and please stick to 7-8 minutes to begin with. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Indeed, I managed to drive safely to the Resilience Conference, and I didn't want to create an incident. Happy New Year, and it's indeed a pleasure and an honor to speak in this occasion. I'm actually particularly happy to see my good old friend, Mr. Parvat Jaisi, in the dais, because I had lost him on my radar screen. Now he appeared like a very bright star. And when he dialed out numbers such as training 3 million civil servants and 25 million civil servants in the state, I can only start to drool about the type of scale which is operating. So I would actually be in touch with him immediately after. But thank you for inviting me to the session. As mentioned, I have now worked as the director of a G20 global initiative on land restoration. Prior to this, I was heading the crisis management branch, both disasters and conflict, in UNEP based in Geneva. I have moved to Bonn with the UN Convention to Combat Desertification to take up this new initiative, which was started by the G20 countries in 2020. The formal launch of the initiative itself happened in November 2020 by the leaders of the G20 countries in Riyadh virtual summit, followed into Italy, to Indonesia, and now with India. Now, I don't have to elaborate the linkages between land degradation, climate change, and resilience. Climate change causes land to degrade in multiple ways, by heat waves, by cold waves, by excess rain, by lack of rain. But the opposite is also true, that land degradation causes climate change. Peatland, which is just 3% of the global forest, capture 37% of the carbon in the forest. So when peatland is degraded, and which it is, there is significant addition to the global carbon greenhouse gases. So it's a two-way street. And by addressing land degradation at scale, the G20 countries, which hope that this initiative can reduce land degradation by 50% by 2040, we will be able to address multiple challenges, including climate change, and also provide resilience, livelihood, and so on. The initiative has 4 separate thematic streams. One is to work with all countries in the world to promote best practices on land restoration wherever they are. And this best practice may not be just best practice of how land is restored. It could also be best practice in legislation. It could be best practice in financial management. The second element is to work with private sector. Praveen made a reference to this, the importance of private sector in dealing with all matters, including resilience. The third one is to work with civil society, which is self-evident, with indigenous community, with farmers, with women, with youth. And finally, build capacity at scale. We are hoping to work in all the 193 member states of the United Nations and see how capacity on land restoration can be hardwired into the various academic systems, especially agricultural universities, forestry institutions, civil engineering, water resources engineering. So these are the 4 elements on which we are currently working. And as each of the individual presidencies come up, as with Italy and Indonesia, they picked up specific thematic elements within the land restoration spectrum. In Indonesia, for example, they picked up mangroves and peatlands because they have nationally ambitious programs on peatland restoration and mangrove restoration. Now that the presidency has moved to India, India has decided to take up 2 very important issues. One is restoration of areas degraded by abandoned mining locations. And there are hundreds of thousands of hectares of this in India and also globally. There are also good practices of land restoration globally. So India has decided that this is one of the areas where they want to bring the parties together, give them training, give them support, and also collectively learn. The second area, which is even more linked to climate change, is restoring areas affected by forest fires. As you know, forest fires, including woodland fires, are on the rise across the globe. It is happening with more intensity in areas where we are used to it, such as California and Australia, but it is also appearing in massive scales in places which are not used to it. For example, in Turkey, they had more land degraded than 20 years combined before that. So we are the India presidency is focusing on this. And the G20 Global Initiative is working with the India presidency to ensure that we bring together expertise from not only the G20 countries, but also beyond. And at this point, we are building our network, working closely with the Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, which is co-led by UNEP and FAO, and with UNEP partners in private sector and public sector, so that we can meet the land restoration objectives. The recently concluded Montreal Convention for Biodiversity COP in Montreal has given us a strong positive signal by agreeing to a 30% land restoration by 2030. So once again, we have the targets, we have the mandate, and we are looking forward to working with the partners. Thank you all.
Thank you, Murali, so much for sharing the initiative. And it's a very pragmatic example of how a G20, which doesn't have a secretariat, which doesn't have a sort of a established or body which is supporting it in an ongoing manner, can actually start initiatives which have a life of their own, which can actually then continue to work with different presidencies. So this is another sort of model which is not necessarily institutionalized in one place or one sort of location, but has sort of initiatives which find favor with a lot of G20 member countries, can actually develop a life of their own. And this is precisely what the Indian presidency is also attempting to do, to identify some of these areas where these initiatives which are propagated, which are initiated during the Indian presidency, can actually continue. So great to hear from you, Murali. And now I had the pleasure of inviting Shri Atul Bagai, who is the head of UNEP in India, sort of a very dear colleague with whom we work very closely on several environment issues. So over to you, Mr. Bagai.
Thank you, Ashish.
Yes.
And I just wanted to apologize. I'm in a very unstable network area, so I won't put on my video. I'm in Trivandrum for a G20 meeting, and I have already lost this session a couple of times. So if it's all right, I'll not switch on my video because it might be unstable. But thanks a lot for inviting UNEP, and after listening to my old friend Praveen and Akhilesh Ji Gupta Ji and Murali, my ex-colleague from UNEP, I really don't know what else I can add to what is being discussed. And with such excellent moderation by Ashish, who also rightly said that we work very, very closely. But I just wanted to highlight 2 or 3 aspects, and I'll try to limit my intervention to about, within the time that Ashish has given us, about 5-6 minutes. But I think the capacity building challenge which is there, which was actually brought out by Praveen, is something where an institutional structure is being made through the Karam Yogi platform and through the IGOT platform. And as Ashish rightly said, I think all institutions, whether they are bilaterals or international organizations and other stakeholders at a national level, need to pitch in to really make this 3 million target or 30 million target a reality. I think in India, the capacity building infrastructure is there, whether it's at a state level or at a national level or even at the academic levels in the educational institutions. I think the big job which Praveen has is to how to bring that together into a orchestra to be able to achieve this target. We are working closely, for example, in Kerala, and coming closer to the topic of resilience, we've developed a training module for the panchayat officers on eco-DRR, which is to bring in the ecological aspects into the DRR issue. And this is something that Anil and I have been discussing very closely of how can we scale it up. And I think that's the challenge that working in Kerala in a few villages in the panchayat level officers, we come up with a good model, but we have 2.75 lakh panchayats in India. And Praveen, how do we scale that up through the institution that you have, or through the Panchayati Raj Ministry, or through the Rural Development Ministry? So we are in talks with Secretary Panchayati Raj and Secretary RD to see if important ecological aspect of DRR could be scaled up quickly through the Panchayati Raj structure that the government has. And there is no doubt that while international organizations like Murali's or mine or Ashish's yours, we can bring in some good practices or we can bring in some pilots, but if we really need to see that they get scaled up, the government has to really pitch in through mainstreaming it through their institutional structure. And a similar example of resilience I can give is our discussions that are going on, and UNDP did some fantastic work on this about 10 years back. And we are discussing now with the Ministry of Rural Development in terms of how can the Ministry of Rural Development poverty alleviation schemes be made green, or how can climate resilience be brought into the various poverty alleviation schemes. And with the kind of budget that the Government of India has for the Ministry of Rural Development, you can, with a nice policy approach, actually make that billions of dollars of investment that the Ministry of Rural Development is making on an annual basis, bring in a lot of infrastructure that is climate resilient. So I think from our perspective, this certainly is very clear that while we can bring in some knowledge, some technical expertise, some best practices globally, and if we can work closely with the governments, both central and state governments, and try to scale them up through the ongoing schemes, that mainstreaming what Murali was talking of is really the institutional approach that should be followed. I'm extremely thankful to Anil Ji for inviting UNIT for this. It's so nice to see Praveen, with whom we're working now very closely on a variety of issues. And Praveen, I was really impressed with some of the slides you showed on the Maharashtra climate issues, and I will certainly like to get a copy of that, and I'm sure the presentations will be shared. And Gupta ji, it's always such a pleasure to hear your wisdom, and thanks Ashish for giving us this opportunity, and we would be very supportive of any task that would be given by the government to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Atul ji, for making out time and for joining us from Kerala. So I think we've heard from the panelists, and we've also like to kind of give the floor to Anil Gupta, who's been kind of the sutradhar of this initiative, this entire conference, to kind of weigh in on what you've heard thus far. So maybe reflect also a little bit on what you've heard, and then also pave the way for a little bit of an interaction while you sort of give your own inputs and remarks, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Moderator. And what appears from the discussion that on the policy fronts and on technology cooperation, a lot of water has already flown and there is some good level of clarity. Now, when it comes to operationalizing, the issue comes on capacity building. As almost all the including chairperson and the co-panelists also have emphasized on this. So capacity buildings emerges as one of the critical cross-cutting dimension of cooperation. And if we look at the cooperation in area of disaster risk reduction, I would recall in 2012, the same Vigyan Bhavan, we had organized the East Asia Summit ASEM conference. That was a big summit, and several East Asian countries and the ASEM was also present here. And there also the training, capacity building and research cooperation emerged as major issue. So there are issues identified, and now G20 provides a very, very, I would say that, established kind of a framework, more effective framework to operationalize known things which we could not operationalize in the past. We wanted to, but we could not. to that level. Then one is very important, that when we talk about capacity building and any kind of dimension, if we see in DRR, we have sectoral approaches, like how do we mainstream DRR into power sector, how do we mainstream DRR into the water sector. Then n number of training packages or training modules, and different kind of training curriculums are also there. I think there is a positive aspect as well as there is. So this is one of the important things, that we look at different kind of a curriculum by different kind of institutions, different kind of agencies across these countries, and also how do we join hands, not only sharing the knowledge with each other, but also help other countries which are even beyond G20. Because ultimately we are talking about the South-South cooperation also, and then there are various fronts, like BIMSTEC is a front, then we have the Hindu Kush Himalaya under the EC mode, other kind of networks. So we have several networks. So there are a lot of parallel things going, lot of overlap also. So G20 provides a better opportunity to strengthen, because India has this leadership for 1 year. And India's leadership matters a lot, because India is a real lab of disaster management. Because there is no disaster which is not there in India, and we had all kind of experiences of dealing with all kind of disasters. So, so that becomes a kind of a duty also, and that becomes an opportunity also for India's leadership. One is that how can we do some kind of institutional mapping across all G20 countries of potential institutions having specialized initiatives in the past, which are planning to have initiatives in the area of DRR and climate resilience, and then identify what is best in each of these institutions, and then do some kind of a then we can make some kind of a framework, and then join hands. And I think that would be one idea. And an IDM along with the partners have been hosting a number of international initiatives also, like I think it was a few years back, just before COVID, we organized a program of officers from Asia Pacific countries, and 31 countries were represented here. UNSCAP and other partners, they were with us. So that's very important. Another aspect that comes to my mind, that the Honorable Prime Minister's 10-point agenda on DRR, that reflects that the lessons of disaster should not go waste. I think that this thing we talk time and again, but we find that lessons go waste many times, if not fully, at least partly. I think that's very important, because each disaster gives lesson, whether it took place in India or any of other countries. So what lesson any other country drawn, and what lesson we have drawn, then we can work on that, contextualize it, and then we can bring into the training packages, capacity building packages. So I think that is an area very important. The other point I would like to touch, that DRR fraternity has several phases. Like some people working in disaster management or climate resilience, if you talk to them, they will primarily talk about the operational requirements, or operational level trainings, or the training of field level people. There are some people, some experts who talk that, no, we need to strengthen the entire, we should have a more holistic approach, and we should look at the policy level, planning level, and then link it both ways, upward and downward kind of things. So, and each of these will have different kind of training requirements. How do we address under the same framework? I think that is also a very important area of cooperation, because there are certain institutions in some countries which are more focused on response related trainings. Some are more humanitarian kind of things. Some are more into planning related, like India's initiative. Unique examples of sectoral based planning. All the ministries of government of India has been asked to prepare the disaster management plan, and some of the states also have come up with state level departmental disaster management plans. That is something unique, and many other countries are looking at it. So I think that is also one of the important area. But despite of the best efforts, what we see that one gap area we will need to work, that identifying or better assessing and addressing the gap between different segments in capacity building. Like at the state level, we have the disaster management department, our SDMA and relief department. On the other hand is the climate change, this thing. One is that. Second is then sectoral institutions as sectoral Training institutions are there, like in Power Ministry of Power, we have the Power Training Institution. Similarly, many of the ministries have their sectoral institutions. Then there are corporate, and basically when we are looking at promoting private-public partnership, how do we pitch in with that? Not only FICCI, but there are several other institutions and various chamber of commerce on various sectoral dimensions also. Then civil society, social dimensions, ministries. Beside that, the gap between the thought process about disaster management, the academic fraternity has, and the operational fraternity has, and the training fraternities has. Many times when we organize some kind of discourses or discussions at NIDM, calling the experts from outside, there is many times we find a clear-cut divisions. Some say no, disaster management should focus only on the field level, the operational issues, the sectoral dimensions. So I think we need to weave these things into framework, and that would help us making this more effective. NIDM has recently tried to showcase that operational research. So this is a new category now emerging, little bit closer to action research, or say that the applied research, but it's a different form where we are trying to investigate something or analyzing something which is directly linked with improving the operational requirements in disaster management. Some of the studies, they are reflected in the digital kiosk also. In the first floor, there are 3 digital kiosks. So their link and other things are also provided. That what kind of studies? Like one is that the institutional mechanism for auditing disaster-related deaths. This one. And then going beyond loss and damage assessment. These kind of several studies. And the third one was reflected in the inaugural discussion also, that how do we measure risk? So basically the city level measurement of risk and resilience, the scorecard based approach, these kind of studies were there. And I think these are some of my points, and also those were emerging from the previous discussions. So over to you for taking this forward.
Thanks, Dr. Gupta. And I think so what I'd like to do is now open the discussion up for questions and answers. But I'd like to start with sort of posing one question from my side while all of you think about your potential questions to the panelists, or even just raising a sort of an opinion, but keeping in mind that we have another 15 minutes. So we are okay in terms of time, I think. So my question, and I think I'd address it to Mr. Pardesi first. You've kind of framed it really nicely, the entire discussion around cooperation for strengthening capacities. I think this is music to ears of people who've been working on technical cooperation for years, and who've been saying that especially countries like India are not going to get the kind of financing which is promised at global fora, and it's not going to be, it's going to pale in comparison to what the domestic financing is already available. We heard from Krishna Vats in the morning about the $6 billion available, and the 15th Finance Commission allocations are way higher. We also know heard Atulji about the MORD, the rural development programs, the kind of budget outlays they have. And so what comes to India in terms of international finance is a pittance. So in terms of capacity building, and especially in this area of disaster risk reduction, you've already spoken about this, but also broadly about climate change. Where do you think should be the attention? Because this was a point which was also raised by Dr. Anil Gupta just now. What is the focus that what should we prioritize? Everything is important. But what is the priority that you believe, sitting in the Capacity Building Commission, which we should kind of focus our attention on?
Thank you, Ashish, for that, and really moderating this session so well. Professor Gupta just talked about sectoral versus operational, and then he also talked about the fact that we don't learn from disasters that much. What we learned in the Capacity Building Commission, and this is my second year now, so this is a new sector, is that adults like yourselves, me, we don't learn from lectures, from books, from teaching, and also, sorry to say that, from any courses. We don't learn. So the rule is 70-20-10. That is, 10% of all adult learning comes from reading a book or attending a lecture or things like that. 20% comes from peer-to-peer. What I talk to him, or what I was just talking to Secretary RNR from Uttar Pradesh, or what he learns from me, that's peer learning. And 70%, and that's what I want us to focus on, comes from experiential, on-the-job learning. How do we provide experiential learning? That's the thing. So whether it is an IDM, or whether it is Capacity Building Commission, or whether it is cross-country cooperation across institutions, you know, getting people together and giving them lots of lectures, and sorry, even I did a PowerPoint presentation, that doesn't really work. What we found works is, in Civil Aviation Ministry, we send people in the ministry to work in Indigo Airlines for 7 days, those who look after airports to work at JMR Airport. Just now we are in the midst of putting people who work in public sector banks, whose productivities are, let's say, lower than a comparative bank like ICCI or HDFC, to go and work there for 7 days and come back, because experiential on the job. How does it apply to us? The point that I wanted to make is, let's say Kerala has a very good project on disaster resilience. Maharashtra, with UNDP and GIZ, a colleague from GIZ is here, implemented a project on mangrove restoration. And you can just check from the satellite data that the mangrove percentage in Maharashtra has gone up over the last 7-8 years. So there's a result on the ground. So teaching about it doesn't work. What works is if people can go and look and work in these project sites and with these offices for 5-7 days, then, you know, they come back with a mind shift change. So for me, experience sharing by actually going on some of these projects or works or policy issues is the key.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of at the center of a lot of the work around international cooperation also, because sort of having worked in bilateral agencies and multilateral agencies, I've seen a lot of these, well, sort of experiential learning exchanges will foster domestically. So Ashish Tiwari ji is sitting here, Manoj sir is also here, like taking them to Himachal to learn about what Himachal is doing and vice versa. Atriji is also sitting here, but also a lot of other sort of international work, not only in well, sort of north-south, but also I remember doing a training program where we took a bunch of African sort of country representatives to field sites, MG Narega sites. Yes. Brilliant work. They kind of learned a lot while sort of they were on the field. So, well, I hope you're primed to ask your questions. So, if you have any questions, raise your hand, and then we'll collect a few questions and then turn over to our panelists for remarks. So, I see a hand here. Do we have a microphone running, going, or is it? Oh, you have something on your desk. Please go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Hi.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi everyone, respected dignitaries. I am Ramakant Naik. I'm a PhD scholar from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, in the Department of Disaster Management. So I'm basically from Kalahandi, Odisha. So when I went to the field, I see that community groups are there who are willing to work and make themselves resilient. But there are very significant backdrop in the implementation of policies among the, so basic trainings and resources should be provided to them, and that what I found is very significantly backdropped. So I just wanted to know that when we are talking about G20 on capacity building aspects, so what opportunity or what kind of support we are providing, or we are looking to provide to the community so that they can make themselves resilient?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good question. Sir, please.
Yeah. So myself, Shivanand Pai, Institute for Climate Change Studies, Kerala government. See, this, what I'm going to say may be slightly, different from the importance of this session, but very important for the climate change issues. And see, this is about actually population growth. I think that the point, I thought importance of that, controlling that, to put in the beginning of the summit itself. We know that last several decades, when we are talking about global warming, if you see the population growth also. From 1952 at present, global population has increased from around 3 billions to around 7 billion. In India itself, 35 crores to now we talk about 1.35. We have added 1 billion. So if you see that basically most disaster and its impact is mainly related to or climate change. Everything is related to population. So you can see that because of increase in the population, we have to feed more, we have to find out more habitat, you need more infrastructure. So this all has actually caused more greenhouse gases emission, and it has more climate change, land degradation. So all that impact we are, you will find that basically increase of the population growth. But this point, we never discuss in any of the issues related to climate change. So this is just, I thought that in the beginning of the summit, how we can do, and everything, it will come back to population growth. I don't want to say, because everybody know how we will be taking into the summit this issue. That was my
Thanks for sharing your opinion. And one final question, then I'll ask my panelists to respond. Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. This is Professor Shamim from University of Kashmir, Srinagar. It's a privilege and honor to be here in this summit. It was an honor to listen to Mr. Gupta and the other panelists there earlier also. I just have 2 points to mention, that we have to think beyond the identifying the issues. Climate change has been discussed for last decades or so as such, and we still are tracing whether the glaciers are melting or not. But I think we should go beyond this by adaptation and mitigation process. I think we actually can't afford to go on by identifying certain things. I wish that Guptaji is there, and the coming programs from the DST and others will be that how we will be addressing the livelihood issues. And those issues are indigenous in terms because of our diversity in the country as such, from north, south, east, west. So we have individual issues as such. So we have to address those issues and give them the solutions on the ground, how we will address that. We can't actually live in the isolation and trying to figure out whether it is still climate change or not. So this is one point. The other point, which referring to the theme as such in terms of the capacity building as such, I think we have been discussing, I think NIDM is doing a good, commendable job in terms of the capacity building and other things as such. But we strongly need to have some auditing on that aspect, as whether that on ground actually, is it that the same lot is actually every day coming and joining us, and how far that's going percolating down to the ground. And also in terms of what gentleman Pardesi Sahab is referring in terms of how you will share with the other people in terms of trying to take up them to the different institutions, or for that matter ministries and other things where they can learn the things. I think because of our huge population as such, we actually can't afford to do it in terms of only the civil servant aspects as such. Because I strongly believe that we are still in the prism of looking at that, especially in the universities where we see it from the civil service point of view, it's an academic discourse. But on ground, actually, are we able to actually percolate it through the research, which Guptaji was referring, that we are actually trying to figure out that 1,000 more postdocs. I think those actually need to take, that should not be in the cupboards, those postdocs. They actually have to be on ground, and that those aspects and topics have to be into. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks. You see a lot of PhDs not in closets, but on the ground. Yeah, I think I have 3 questions, 2 more hands. Please talk to people during lunch. We're really running out of time. I think I'll turn over to Dr. Akhilesh Gupta first to talk about population. Quick response on that. And then I'll hand over to Mr. Pardesi about the capacity building questions. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the area, population is a political issue. And that is why people don't want to discuss here. But good news is that India population is getting stabilized. So especially we find that there is going to be a peaking of population in India somewhere in say 2040 in the rural area and 2050 in the urban area. So this kind of peaking may take place shortly. But yeah, the whole issue is, I totally agree that our resources are limited, and therefore all adaptation action and all entire climate action is centered around population, and we have a challenge, there is no doubt about it. And this is the question which we cannot answer as scientists, or as need to be answered at the political level. If you allow me, I'll answer his point at the implementation of climate action. So, as I mentioned, we already started working at the state, but it need to be a little more proactive, and the state climate change center need to be a little proactive on that. We are now finalizing. We already released the vulnerability mapping, but shortly, by March, April, we are going to release a risk mapping. And that is the point when the action will start. And we hope that now we are going to work through these 29 state centers that we have, we're going to work with the implementation of adaptation plan, climate adaptation plan. Thank you.
Okay. So, Mr. Pardesi, over to you. So the question on taking capacity building to the community and also the state.
And also I'll start first for the issue I think you raised about auditing the capacity building programs and how they reach the ground. It also addresses that. Basically, most of the training that we do only assesses the input, whether you like the lecture, whether the content was good. So we have changed that lens now in the capacity building, and whether it is NIDM or Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy of the IAS, they have to now do an impact assessment of their training in terms of performance of the trainees. So we are doing it right now. For example, we train police people, and now we are asking citizens 3 months after in those police stations, is there a change in the way complaints are addressed, etc. So not that the training was good or bad, but did it result in an impact? So yes, audit of all these capacity building. Otherwise we end up talking amongst ourselves. Going to the community aspect, I think the important thing here again is that in every state, almost in every district, there are some very good gram panchayats who are like model gram panchayats, where there is a lot of social capital, where the people work together. They are first responders. There are villages, for example, the Hivre Bazaar in Maharashtra, where they didn't allow a single COVID death, where the village worked together to isolate, help people and all. Now, how do we transfer this learning to 2.85 lakh or 3 lakh gram panchayats? So Panchayati Raj Ministry is working on a huge capacity building program for elected representatives. Because elected representatives, even if they change office, are permanent residents of the village. Government officials move in and out. But elected officials, that is Sarpanch, Panchayat members, they are residents of the village. So if a disaster doesn't come next year, but comes 10 years later, you still have a residing capacity there. So there is a big program. It's not so easy to work at this scale. It's an effort. The IGOT, which Honorable Prime Minister has done, it's an intergovernmental online training platform. During COVID time, it could provide training to more than 3 lakh people on COVID practices, health practices. So this is an online training platform where wherever you are, as is, where is basis, self-paced learning is being made available. Today, NDRF, National Disaster Response Force, is working with IGOT to onboard digital learning on the IGOT platform, which most community leaders can take from where they are. So these are some of the new tools. Let's see how far they can reach. It's not an easy task.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pardesi. And I'd like to sort of wrap up the session because we've run out of time. Just to respond to you about livelihoods going beyond framing, this is a framing session, as you would have figured, and we're going to actually have sessions focusing on livelihoods, focusing on vulnerability, several sessions throughout the next 2.5 days. Please stay around, and you will sort of, I'm sure, we'll be able to respond, and you will be able to sort of shape some of these questions as well. Thanks very much. Please, a round of applause to the panelists.
Thank you very much indeed.
Of course, don't forget the online colleagues. Thanks very much for joining, Murli and Atulji. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. And I would now request Dr. Lokendra Thakkar. He is Coordination State Climate Change Center, Government of Madhya Pradesh, to kindly do the honors of presenting a token of gratitude to our distinguished chair of the session, Shri Praveen Pradeshi ji. Thank you very much indeed, sir. And may I request Mr. Thakkar to kindly join the panel for a group photograph, please. And ladies and gentlemen, let's once again put our hands together for the wonderful session we had.
Please, again. Are?
And
Come, please. Please. वो अभी भेज दे।
And ladies and gentlemen, with that, we will now break for lunch. Lunch is once again served in the foyer, that is on the first floor. Also, the exhibition and the Parisambad sessions are being organized on the first floor. And a lot of people have been asking where to get your delegate bags from after submitting the registration form. That is also at the exhibition area. You may kindly go there, submit your registration form and collect your delegate bag. The next session will begin at 2:45. I request you all to be back and seated in time for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you. Keep in touch. Yes.
श्वेता, किसी को बोलो सर का मोमेंटो रखवाना पड़ेगा.
Honor.